Dunedin students say the flat party culture has grown in response to Otago University acting as the fun police and clamping down on student pubs and bars. But a leading preventive medicine researcher says flat parties are driven by a proliferation of cheap alcohol and lax liquor laws. 19-year-old Sophia Crestani died when hundreds of people tried to flee a party on Dundas Street last weekend. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown visited Student Digs, where he spoke to residents about the attraction of flat parties.
It wasn't that long ago, Otago University students revelling in their newfound independence descended in their hundreds on the big three student pubs in Dunedin: the Guardies, the Bowler and the Cook. Attracted by the lure of $5 jugs, cheap shots and a warm room, students happily poured into nearby pubs. Now those student haunts are closed or completely different from their hedonistic heyday. The university now owns the land the Guardies and the Bowler used to occupy. Third-year communications student Emily Wade says flat parties have filled the void. I spoke to the 21-year-old in the sparse and drafty dining room of her flat, one of many in an old multiplex on Dundas Street. Flat parties have always been a feature of university life, but Miss Wade says there are now regular big flat parties, and by big she means hundreds going along.
Some flats have traditionally several big parties in a year, but yeah, they probably about once a month. I'd say there's at least one big annual one of some sort.
And these are the ones that attracts potentially hundreds?
Yeah, and people not just from university. Like for Agnew, our flatmate, he had some of his friends come down from Auckland and Christchurch to stay here just to go.
Miss Wade says there's a perception the Otago University is waging a war on fun and trying to close down student pubs. Her flatmate, Emma Walker, says the availability of cheap booze from nearby liquor stores means students aren't going to walk from North Dunedin to the Octagon for crowded and expensive bars.
If you go out to town, you can't bring your own drinks, you have to buy drinks, you have to stand in line for 30 plus minutes in the freezing cold. It's just a bit more friendly, I guess, going to flat parties, and it's closer. I don't have to walk outside in the cold for 30 minutes just to spend an hour in a really loud club to go home to get Macca's.
A 10-year study found far fewer students in Dunedin were drinking in pubs in 2014 compared to a decade earlier. In the mid-2000s, the student pubs were known for their outlandish marketing campaigns, such as the Cook's all-day binge drinking fest or the Bowler's promotion offering a petrol-soaked couch and matches. But rather than the university playing an active role in the demise of the student pub, the Dunedin School of Medicine's Chair of Preventive and Social Medicine, Jennie Connor, says the campaigns were a last-ditch attempt by bars to hold on to their customers.
They were not financially viable. It's got nothing to do with the university. In their desperation to attract more students to their pub, the Captain Cook, the Bowling Green, and probably to a lesser extent the Guardies, they've gone to great measures to try and be outrageous and have irresponsible promotions to try and get the students to come and behave in the way that they perceived students should behave and that would make them a living. And it failed.
Professor Connor says the continued existence of student bars such as Starters and Union Bar doesn't support the argument that the university is acting as the fun police. She says flat parties have always existed, but are now driven by cheap off-site alcohol and social media.
There's been a big change in terms of drinking in pubs, certainly in the last generation, and that revolves largely around how cheap alcohol is. So a generation ago there was no alcohol in supermarkets, and of course the purchase age was higher. So that flood of cheap alcohol in the universities wasn't there. This is one of the things that applies to the whole population, not just the student population.
Professor Connor says the only way to really tackle flat party culture is by increasing the price of alcohol and bringing it more in line with what's on offer at licensed premises. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull says the council attempted to put in place measures to reduce alcohol harm in the city, such as restrictions on the number of liquor outlets in the student quarter and the hours they could operate, but was frustrated when its local alcohol policy was successfully appealed by outlets including the country's two supermarket giants.
There's several sources of frustration. One is that if you've got a local alcohol plan which is designed to allow the community to set its own rules, It's a farce to have it overruled from Wellington, so it's not a local alcohol policy at all. And the other is that it would appear that in this country we know the causes of alcohol-related harm, so insofar as we won't do anything about them, we're putting corporate profits ahead of community wellbeing.
Professor Connor and Mr Cull want to see alcohol reform and a reversal of the 2012 liberalisation of liquor laws. Otago University says it will consider wider discussions arising from the death of second-year student Sophia Crestani once the police investigation is complete. The manor, the flat in which she was fatally injured as hundreds left a party on Saturday night, will be leased by the university as a uni flat next year. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.